Okay, so let's cover Git and GitHub. I've described GitHub in the past as sort of a Dropbox for your code, and there's some truth to that, but it's an incomplete description. It's not the whole picture. Git coupled with GitHub allows you to have a lot more control over which files are tracked, which versions of which files are tracked, and it allows you to do things like collaborate with others, version control in a very, very fine-tuned way, and roll back to previous commits. It lets you do a whole bunch of different things that are really hard to capture in one video, so instead of going into the theoretical aspect of it, I think it's best to just dive right in. So a common problem for beginners is I want to share this code, but I don't know how to put it up on GitHub. And that's the first problem you'll ever encounter with GitHub usually. So I just want to go through that scenario first. Now I'm on my home directory here in the terminal. I'm using iterm2. I'm going to go into my sites folder with the cd command. I will make a directory using the mkdir command called test project. Now I want to open this project up in Sublime Text. Now I have this letter S mapped to the Sublime Text command, so if I type S, it'll open that folder. Oh, I got to go into the project first, then S, and then now it'll open this folder in Sublime Text. So I'll go ahead and maximize that, and inside this folder, I want to add some junk files. I'll add index.html, style.css, and one more for good measure, readme.md. So let's just add some junk code. H1, this is my file, whatever. And then H1 color blue, whatever. Okay, now readme.md, MD stands for markdown, and this file will be used to show other people what your project's about. So for example, a top level summary, or if they're trying to use your project and maybe there are some steps to getting your project installed, then this would be the file where you explain that. So you might say something like test project. To install, do step 1, 2, step 2, 3, step 3, stuff like that. And then maybe you'll do a summary. Summary, this is a test project, and then I'll add some filler. Okay, so now we have 3 files that we want to push up to GitHub. We want to tell GitHub that this test project folder is the top level folder for a project that we want to version control. So let's just keep moving on. If you go to github.com now and make an account, this is the home screen for GitHub, and if you've been following people like I have, then you'll see a lot of activity on the left, and there's some other things on this page, but the important part to get up and running is this plus sign. If you hover over it, it says create new, click it and go to new repository. The repository name is going to be the same as your test project so that you don't get confused. If I called this project 3 instead of test project, then it becomes very difficult very quickly to know which repositories on GitHub map to which folders on your computer. So to keep it short and simple, let's call this repository test project. And then we have the option to add some descriptions. This is my new project, whatever. And then we can initialize this repository with a README, but since we've already created this README here, I'll just leave this unchecked. Git ignore is sort of out of the scope of this video. You will learn it really quickly, but for now it's not important. And for this license option, this is just covering the legalities of how people are allowed to use your code in their own projects and whether or not they're allowed to use it for commercial purposes, things like that. But since this is just a test project, we can leave that unselected as well. Create repository, and then you're taken to this screen. This first section looks like it has what we need. if you look at this first command, all it's actually doing is creating a file called readme.md with this content. But since we've already created our junk files here, we don't need to create a fake file with this command here. So let's keep on moving. If I type git init, let's see what happens. Let's go into this folder, type git init. And now it's saying initialized empty git repository in the current folder, in this .git folder. So if I type ls, you won't see this folder because it's prefixed with this period. So if I do ls, I think it's a, yeah, then you can see the invisible files as well, and sure enough, this .git folder shows up. So this, if we cd into this git folder, you'll see a bunch of junk. You're not going to be expected to learn what each of these things do, so don't worry about that. But to keep it quick, this folder contains a lot of metadata that will help Git track what's going on inside the project itself. So let's return to github.com, and now we have to do an add, a commit, adding a remote, and then push. So let's just do these one by one, and I'll explain what's going on. Now I'm going to go back to the test project folder. If I do an ls again, I can see these 3 files. Let me just type a git status. Git status. So let's go through this one by one. On branch master, Git uses branches to keep track of code. So you might have something like a master branch, which at any given time should have the best or production ready version of your code. So if you have a new feature to add, you would not develop on the master branch. You would create maybe a develop branch, or a branch called add new feature or add feature A or something like that. But master branch is always going to be the branch that has the most production ready version of your code. So for our purposes, again, it doesn't really matter because this is just a test project, but by default, when you create a new project, you'll be on the branch master. This is the initial commit. Untracked files. Untracked files means Git is actually not looking at these files. So it's basically telling you, hey, I see that these files exist, but I'm not actually keeping track of them yet. So first we have to tell Git that we want Git to pay attention to them. And the way to do that is by adding them. So let me do an ls. And since these 3 files are all brand new, Git won't know about any of them, so I can add them one by one. Git readme.md, git add index.html, git add style.css. So now if I do a git status, it'll say changes to be committed, new file readme.md, new file index.html, and style.css. So if we go back here, we've done git init to tell Git on our computer that this is a Git repository. This folder contains a project of code that I want to track. Using the git add command, we told Git which files we want to track. And now there's this git commit command. Git commit is a way to effectively take a snapshot of your current code. So right now, let's see, if we have ls, we only have 3 files here. And since we haven't really done changes, we've just brought those files into existence. Let's take a snapshot saying git commit and add a message to this commit. And we can add a little annotation to this snapshot of our code. So we might say initial commit or initial version or something. If we type enter, then it'll now say 3 files changed. 23 insertions just means lines of code usually. So there's 10, 3, 10. So 23 lines total. And now if I do git push, this is the command that would normally push the code that's on your computer up to GitHub. But if I press enter now, it's gonna error out, because even though we've added the files to a Git repository, we don't actually know, our computer doesn't actually know where we want to push to. We've created this on GitHub, this test project repository, but we didn't actually hook this remote location up to our local location. So what does that entail? So if you look at this next line here, git remote add origin git at github.com : and then your username and then the repository name .git. So if we just copy and paste this in, I'll explain it here. So git is just the top level git command as always. Remote is the subcommand. Add indicates that you want to add a remote location, and we'll call that remote location the origin. Origin is just a very common command for the main remote. Sometimes you might have situations where you have one, repository on your computer and then several different remotes, but that's usually for more advanced projects, so you don't have to worry about that. So this is just a simple way of saying, hey, Git, this file that I'm adding this remote to, I want it to track this location here, and I want to name that location origin. So if I type enter now, then unfortunately there's no success message, but if I try to type git push origin master, now it's saying I'd like to push my current commit. Any commits that I've made on my computer, I want to push those to the remote named origin onto the master branch. So if I hit enter, you'll get some status messages saying counting objects, blah, 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 delta compression, blah, blah, blah. And then if we go back to GitHub and refresh the page, bam, now it works. So if we go to this commit, then initial commit, initial version, and we can click on the commit to see what changed. 3 changed files with 23 additions and 0 deletions. So hopefully that's a good indicator of how to push up your project to Git. But I want to keep on going to show how you would make changes. So now let's say I go back into Sublime, and I'll make the font size a little bigger. And let's say I add a div with a paragraph with the class of, I don't know, main text or something, whatever, it doesn't matter. And I add a new paragraph here. Now let's say I change this to include a rule regarding my paragraph, and I want to do color red and font size, I don't know, let's make it huge for some reason. Actually, this is a bad practice. Let's do, I don't know, 20 pixels. And here, let's say I added a new section. Let's just be nonsensical. Things I love. Cats. Dogs. Totoro. Okay, so now, if I do git status now, it says git status. It says now modified. Previously, if you remember, this said new file. But now it's saying, I know about this file. You told me about this file earlier when you added it with the git add command, but now I notice that that file has changed. Same with this one and same with this one. So since our last commit, we've made some changes. Now let's say we want to create another snapshot and push those changes up to GitHub. So we can do that with the git add command. So let's say I want to save the git add index and the git add style. But let's do a git status. Let's say that I don't want to add this readme because I want to keep my commits somewhat clean, and HTML and CSS changes, they're kind of related to each other, right? But this is kind of a separate change. It's unrelated to the work I've done on the HTML and CSS. So let's say that I only want to push these changes up. That is the power of Git. It gives you that option to do that. If you were to use something like Dropbox or Google Drive, you wouldn't be able to do that. So let's just push these changes now. So now I can do something like git commit, add a message, type did some work on the HTML and the CSS, git commit. Now if I do git status, it'll say that this readme is modified. So now I want to add the readme, and let's do another commit, updated readme. Now, if you notice, I didn't type git push after doing this git commit. That doesn't actually matter. You don't need to push every time you commit, because if you type the git commit command, it will save the commit on your local machine. So now if I do git push origin master and I type enter, it'll push all my commits in an orderly fashion up to GitHub. Now if I refresh the page again, there's been 3 commits, and if I click here, sure enough, you can see the latest version of all of them. And now there's so many other topics that this can branch off into. Let's just do one more thing is, let's create a new branch. So if I wanted to do Let's say I wanted to add a JavaScript file. Typically, you would do this on a feature branch, or what's called a feature branch. So I would do something called git checkout, B for branch, and then maybe add new script file or something. And so what this does is it creates a new branch in your code called add new script file. And if I open this file in Sublime Text, and I open this file and I add scripts.js, and I just do console.log hello, enter, and I do a git status. Now it's clear that I added this scripts.js file, so I can add that. Scripts.js, git commit, added a new script, and then git push origin. But instead of master now, I would call it the name of the branch, add new script file. So now this is pushing up to that branch instead of to the master branch. And if I go to GitHub now and refresh the page, now it won't track the 4th commit that I've made, but it will tell you that if you check the add new script file branch, then sure enough you get the 4th branch. The 4th commit. So if you go here, then you can see it here. But if you go back to the master branch, since you changed the branch that you did the work on, it won't be there. And that's when you get into the topic of merges and a bunch of other things that are too difficult to track in this one video, but hopefully that's a good primer. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.